Queen Victoria ascended to the throne in 1837 and reigned until 1901, and in that stretch of 64 years, Britain became the most powerful empire on earth. Factories roared. Railways cut through the countryside. The middle class exploded in size and wealth. Charles Dickens published. Charles Darwin theorized. The world was, by every measurable standard, accelerating. And yet inside all of that momentum, the woman of the house was expected to stand perfectly, deliberately still. Her role was not to participate in the age of progress, it was to embody its respectability. The wealthier and more prominent the family, the more ornamental and constrained her existence was expected to be. A woman who worked with her hands advertised poverty. A woman of leisure advertised status. Her idleness was, in a sense, her job. The ideal was given a name in 1854 when poet Coventry Patmore published The Angel in the House, the work that described the perfect Victorian wife as selfless, morally pure, endlessly patient, and wholly devoted to her domestic world. The poem became enormously influential. Women were expected to embody it. And if they found the cage uncomfortable, they were trained, from girlhood, not to say so. A Victorian woman of the middle or upper class did not simply get dressed. She transformed, and she did it 3 times a day. A lighter morning dress in cotton or linen was appropriate for breakfast and household supervision. By midday, before receiving any visitors, she changed into an afternoon gown. By evening, for any dinner or social event, a third outfit was required: silk, jewelry, a lower neckline, the full performance. Beneath all of it was the corset, worn from adolescence, reshaping the body into the narrow-waisted silhouette that society deemed correct. Doctors argued about its effect on the lungs and organs throughout the century. Social pressure largely won. And beyond the corset, there was posture, which was also policed. Emily Thornwell's Etiquette Manual of 1856 instructed that a lady ought to adopt a modest and intentionally measured gait, because too much hurry could injure the grace that ought to characterize her. Even the speed at which a woman walked was regulated. Mornings, once dressed, were given to correspondence. Letters were not casual in Victorian England, they were the primary infrastructure of social life. Accepting a dinner invitation too quickly appeared eager. Declining without sufficient reason was a minor scandal. One 1856 guide warned bluntly that once you accepted an invitation, nothing but serious illness should prevent your attendance. A woman's word, her promptness, and the quality of her handwriting were all being read before she ever entered a room. The rules that governed Victorian women were not informal social norms passed down through gossip. They were published, compiled into manuals, sold in shops, read like instruction manuals for being human. And some of what they contained, examined today, reads less like etiquette and more like an elaborate system of control. A young, unmarried woman could not go out in public without a chaperone. Not to a park, not to a shop, nowhere. If she happened to encounter a gentleman she recognized on the street, she could not simply acknowledge him. According to Cassell's Household Guide of 1869, she was required to take the initiative and extend her hand first. The gentleman had to wait for her acknowledgement before lifting his hat, fully lifting it, not merely touching the brim, and he was to use the hand farthest from her. If she offered her hand, he was then obligated to turn and walk alongside her rather than stop. The conversation itself had to remain brief and reserved, with strict reticence of speech and conduct in public, and absolutely no animated discussion. The fan was a language of its own. Different positions communicated different messages: interest, rejection, impatience, flirtation, allowing women to say in gesture what they could not say in speech when men were present. It was the era's equivalent of a private channel, conducted in full public view. At the dinner table, even the decanter carried code. If a hostess replaced its stopper after pouring a guest's drink, The message was clear: one glass only. If she left the stopper on the table beside the decanter, more was available. Guests were expected to read this without being told. Failure to understand these signals marked you immediately as someone who did not belong. The marriage market ran on its own calendar. January to June was the official London season. A young woman had 3 seasons to secure a husband. After 3 failures, society largely wrote her off as a spinster. Couples were never permitted to be alone. A chaperone was always present. A gentleman called on a woman at her family home to assess character, watched by her relatives. One only sought a match within one social class, and the eldest son of any estate was considered the most eligible prize. The afternoon hours belonged to the ritual of paying calls, a social visit system that functioned as both networking and surveillance. A woman would dress, order her carriage, and circulate through the homes of friends, acquaintances, and family, leaving her calling card if the household was unavailable. Who received whom, how promptly a card was returned, who was given 15 minutes, and who was given 30, all of it carried social meaning that the women involved understood perfectly. Tea at 4 o'clock was the centerpiece of domestic socializing. It was simultaneously a meal, an audition, and a test of household management. How a woman poured, what she offered her guests, how she steered conversation across competing personalities, everything was noted. The drawing room was not a space of genuine relaxation. It was a stage, and the performance ran daily. When Victorian women weren't managing social obligations, they were managing their accomplishments. Piano was perhaps the most prized. Girls were trained from childhood to perform at family evenings and social gatherings. A woman who played well distinguished herself from her rivals. Music here was not art for its own sake. It was closer to an interview. Watercolor painting was acceptable, not oil, which was considered too vigorous and professional for a lady. Needlework consumed enormous amounts of time. Embroidery, crochet, tapestry, the making of decorative household items. It was productive without being ambitious. It kept the hands occupied and the eyes modestly lowered. Reading was popular, the Brontes, Tennyson, Hardy, but a woman reading political texts or serious philosophy risked being labeled a bluestocking, a term of mild ridicule for women with intellectual pretensions. One 1856 etiquette guide even advised women to cultivate the intellect, not with the idea of becoming a bluestocking or a pedant, but to render her society pleasant to others. Even self-improvement had to be justified by its usefulness to men. Outdoors, croquet, introduced in 1856, became a favorite because it required skill over strength, making it genuinely accessible to women. Lawn tennis followed. Early morning horse rides through Hyde Park were fashionable. And for the politically curious, who had been formally barred from the House of Commons gallery since 1778, there was reportedly one remarkable workaround: crowding into the attic above the Palace of Westminster and pressing ears to ventilation shafts that opened into the chamber below, sitting in heat and darkness to hear fragments of debates about a country they had no vote in. The world of corsets and calling cards existed for a narrow band of English women. For the majority, Victorian life looked entirely different. Working-class women rose before dawn and worked until dark, in factories, mills, and mines, or cleaning the homes and raising the children of the families whose etiquette manuals fill the history books. They had no accomplishments to perform, no season to navigate, no chaperones. The Industrial Revolution that funded Victorian refinement was built on their labor. Child labor was widespread. Overcrowded tenements were the norm in industrial cities. The gleaming codes of the drawing room were as remote from their lives as another world. By the 1880s and 1890s, the architecture of these rules had started to crack. Florence Nightingale had transformed nursing into a respectable profession. George Eliot had published some of the century's most important novels under a man's name, initially, because a woman's name wouldn't have been taken seriously. The Rational Dress Society was organizing against the corset. Women were entering universities in small numbers. The suffrage movement was finding its voice. The etiquette manuals of the 1800s are period curiosities today, amusing, strange, occasionally infuriating. But what they document, underneath their elaborate rules about fan positions and skirt lifting and decanter stoppers, is the extraordinary effort required to keep capable women confined. And what the women of that century left behind in their diaries, their gardens, their charity work, their piano performances, their attic pressed ears against parliamentary ventilation shafts, is evidence that no rulebook, however detailed, could entirely contain them.